I've got a chair to make for a local school that I've never made before. In fact, I've never heard of it before. It's called a storytelling chair. The idea being that the pupil sits beside the teacher so the teacher can support them and help the pupil while they read the story together. Great idea. So when the school approached me, they'd found a picture online of a chair that was in the general direction of what they were thinking of, but not quite. So they sent me this picture and asked me if I'd take a look at it and whether I could come up with something. As you can see, it's an outside chair. It's a fairly sturdy chair. I'd almost describe it as a chunky chair. There are two dimensions that they want me to adhere to. One is the width of the chair, which is 900 mil. I know it's absolutely massive. It's more akin to a park bench than a chair. Anyway, 900 mil wide, so there's room for the pupil and for the teacher to sit side by side. And they also want the seat height to be at 430 mil, so that it's not too tall for the pupil, but not too short for the teacher. So they're the only restrictions that I've got in place, or requirements that I've got really from the client: the width of the chair and the seat height of the chair. The rest of it, they've really said, we'd really like you to come up with something. This is along the kind of lines that we're thinking, but we'd like to see what your ideas are. So after playing around with a piece of paper and a pencil for quite a while, and also I've got to say, rightly or wrongly, that when I'm thinking about the design of a piece, I've always got the timber in mind that I'd like to use and the size of timber that I've got to hand, which I allow to influence me. And as I say, whether that's right or wrong, I don't really know, but it's always the way I've worked over the years. So I've got in mind that this is an outside chair, so I want a good solid piece of timber for outside, and I've got a good piece of Iroko that I'd love to use. Iroko, as I'm sure you're aware, is a great timber, very similar properties to teak, very underrated and quite often hidden behind paint, but looks absolutely beautiful. So I've got this slab of Iroko that's 50 mil thick rough sawn, and it's really flat, so if I'm careful I can get a good wide plank out of it. And what I'm thinking is, for the back of the chair, for those vertical slats, I want to make some pieces that are approximately 100 mil wide. So if I slice this down, this Iroko down, and I then book match those two pieces, I'm going to get these lovely 100 mil wide planks at the back of the chair and then frame that in that arched oak. I think that's going to look absolutely stunning. So I've gone with a Iroko at the back. Apologies, that's the closest I could get to a Iroko from within Fusion. And I'm going to go with a Iroko for the seat, and then the rest of it is going to be in oak. So I've shown this to the client and they absolutely love it and are happy for me to go with this. But I'm going to reserve creative license on it at this point, so that if I feel that something's going to look better if I change it slightly as I go through the process, then I'm going to do exactly that. So I've got an awful lot of raw material prep to do. As I said, I'm starting with the timber that I've got in stock. I've nothing that's of the appropriate size. I've got to machine it all or fabricate it all myself. So I'm going to put some links down below if you want to skip over the planing and the sizing and the creating of the individual pieces and get right to the construction of the chair. Then the links below. If not, let's get started. So this is the piece of Iroko that I mentioned earlier, and as you can see, it's almost as flat as a pancake. I've got high hopes that I can get all but the 50 mil I'd like out of this. I've got an awful lot of pieces to deal with on this build, so I'm going to cut all the sawn timber to approximate length first. Once I've got everything to the approximate length I need, then I'm going to run all the pieces through the planer so I can get one face and edge flat and square. After that, when it comes to thickness in the next stage, I then need to deal with everything individually so I can ensure I get each of the pieces to the exact thickness I need. I'll cut down the pieces I need to make the front and side panels first, taking particular care to book match the grain as I go, otherwise I'm just going to get confused. Best laid plans of mice and men, eh? I like to do a dry clamp up first, just to make sure all the joints are going to close up nice and tight. These pieces are 25mm thick, so there's plenty of surface area there for the glue to adhere to. I don't feel that biscuits or dominoes would bring anything else to the joint. Exactly the same approach with the front panel. I've got a little piece of leftover oak that's nice and straight that I use to keep pressure down on the pieces while I tighten the clamp. Even greater surface area with the legs, so once again I see no benefit in using dominoes or biscuits, just the glue will suffice. As mentioned earlier, I want each of the two pieces that make up each individual back panel to be a book-matched pair. So I kept quoting that line from the wonderful song, "To the window, to the wall, to the window, to the wall." But I didn't go any further than that. Once I had all of the parts assembled, it was then time to head back to the planer again to plane one face flat, square an edge to it, and then for final thicknessing. On to the build proper. I'll start by cutting one end square on all of the pieces that make up the back panel. You remember I said earlier on I reserve creative license. Well, one of my decisions is to use dowels to reinforce the back panel midsection and lower down instead of a flat rail at the back. I think it'll look awesome. I couldn't make up my mind initially whether to go with a round over or with a bevel. Right at the last minute I decided to go with the bevel, and I think it worked out for the best. The other good decision was to cut the bevel on the router table, purely because the two dowel holes I just drilled in each side would have been perfect place for the bearing guided bit to dive into and ruin the piece. I used some 5mm spacers in between the boards just to make sure I didn't over tighten the clamps and drive the dowel in too far, and then that would have ruined the panel. I can only lay my hands on 6 spacers, so 2 glue ups it was. I tried to match the seat boards with the back boards as much as possible to give the impression that the grain flowed down the back and out the seat. As per the back panel, I've still only got the 6 spacers, so 2 glue ups again. Slicing down the pieces for the oak frame on the back panel on the bandsaw, as I've got the table saw set up for someone else and I don't want to change the setup. Using a spiral down cut bit to cut the channel in the oak frame for the Iroko to sit in. It's a 1/2 inch bit, so unfortunately 4 passes per piece. To calculate the angle at the top of the back panel, I struck a line right across the top and then measured down 100mm each side and then trimmed it off with a track saw. I eyeballed down the ruler to get a pencil mark in the general area of where I needed the cut to be, but then I snuck up on it gradually with the chop saw. After a successful first time dry fit, I could apply the glue, clamp it together and grab a coffee. With the back panel complete and final size set, I could move on to sizing and assembling the seat frame. back legs are angled at 10 degrees, so a nice straightforward cut on the chop saw. And the leg to side rail joinery is a nice straightforward domino cut, as long as you keep your reference face front and centre, naturally. Quick dry fit to make sure everything's still on track. In all honesty, I forgot about this cut. I should have done it before I glued the frame to the back panel, but I forgot. So now I've got to come up with a creative way to enable me to remove this section of the outside frame so it slots in between the side rails. And I think this was a pretty damn good solution. This set of domino cuts were slightly more challenging, so I made the centre line of the bit my reference point, if you like, for both the domino cuts on the side rail and on the back panel itself. On the side panel, I marked a line for the inside and outside of the oak frame on the back panel, and then worked back from the centre line so I knew where to place the fence. Before I attempt a rather ambitious glue up, I'll mark each edge that I want to cut a bevel on. So I'll glue and clamp the legs to the front rail. While that's starting to set up, I'll glue the rear legs to the side panels. Give the back panel a thorough sanding and cut the final bevels. Then I'll glue the side rails with the legs firmly attached to the back panel. Then clamp the front to the back and voila, it's nearly a chair. a small notch cut over the oak frame. And then I thought I'd use the planer to cut the angle on the face. Worked out really well. Having got this far through the build without any screws whatsoever, I refuse to allow them into the build now. So unfortunately, it's got to be dowels again. The 5mm gap between the pieces in the back panel was the perfect size to allow these little speed clamps to go in, obviously planned for during the design phase. I set my rail saw to 10 degrees so that I could trim the seat panel to size and match the angle on the back panel. Once again, a little notch required in the seat panel around the oak frame and on the back. and then oak dowels again to secure the seat panel to the frame. Obviously takes far longer than using more modern methods such as screws, but the resultant effect I think is well worth it. I'm rounding over the external edges of the front of the seat panel, and I'll duplicate that round over on the arms as well, so there are no sharp edges for anybody to catch themselves on. I followed exactly the same approach with the seat panel as I did with the back panel. Give it a thorough good sanding. Routed on any additional bevels that I felt were required. And then glue and dowel it into place. And finally for the arms. Rounded corners front and back I felt looked best. And no surprise here, secured again with oak dowel. Just one little detail I needed to be careful of here, which was putting the bevel on the underside of the arm. If I'd have run all the way back, it would have looked terrible on top of the post, so I had to make sure I stopped it in exactly the right place. I've got to say, it makes one feel kind of regal and grandiose with such a high back and such a wide seat. I feel quite kingly. And I'm really pleased with the way it's come out. The oak dowel is a brilliant little touch, and I think it elevates it to a next level, far better than screws, that's for sure. A time-consuming build, but it's going to be there for years to come, giving hopefully a lot of pleasure to both pupil and student. Hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please consider subscribing and maybe hit the like button below. Thanks for watching. See you next time.